She was left hanging with a sign of hate until a silent gunman took her down and rode into town with her. The sun was bleeding into the western sky when Holt rode alone along the dried-up creek bed. His horse moved at a steady pace, hooves muffled by dust and pine needles, until both man and beast stopped without a signal. Ahead, under a crooked oak tree that grew wild on a low ridge, something swayed. It wasn't the wind. Holt narrowed his eyes. His hand brushed the grip of his revolver but didn't draw. He dismounted slowly, every step measured. The late sun painted long shadows across the land, and the shape beneath the oak came into focus. A figure suspended by the arms, barely off the ground, body limp but not lifeless. A girl. Young, indigenous. Her bare feet hung inches above the earth. Her arms had been tied high with coarse rope looped over a gnarled branch. Blood trickled down one arm. Her head slumped to the side, tangled black hair falling over her face. But what struck Holt the most was the sign tacked to her chest, a plank of wood, roughly nailed into her torn dress, with words scorched in dark letters, "White man does not forgive." There were bootprints around the tree, at least 3 sets, maybe more. Holt didn't need to know their names. Their message was clear. This wasn't just punishment, it was theater, a warning. A hate offering left in the open for others to see, but they hadn't finished the job. The girl's chest rose, shallow but real. Her lips were cracked, her face swollen on one side, but she was alive, just barely. Holt scanned the area again. Nothing moved. No sound beyond the shifting trees and his horse breathing behind him. Then, wordlessly, he stepped forward and pulled a small blade from his belt. The ropes creaked as he cut them loose. The girl fell into his arms like a sack of bones, no strength left to fight or flee. She smelled of blood, sweat, smoke, and earth. Her skin was warm, but her hands were cold. He gently tore the sign from her dress and dropped it onto the dirt. Holt didn't speak. He didn't ask who she was, what she'd done, or why the world had turned on her. He just walked back to his horse, the girl in his arms, and laid her gently across the saddle, like she was something sacred. Then he mounted behind her, adjusted her weight against him, and turned toward the fading light, away from the ridge, away from the oak, away from whatever had hung her there to die. And he rode. The night would fall cold, and the next town was hours away. But Holt never stopped for comfort, and he didn't stop for questions. He rode with the weight of a dying girl against his chest, and the silence of a man who had seen too much. Behind him, the crooked oak stood still. The sign lay broken in the dirt, its message unfinished, because someone, at least one man, had refused to let it be true. The desert night crept in quickly, turning the landscape into a patchwork of ghostly grays and silver shadows. Holt didn't slow his pace. The girl's body swayed gently with each movement of the horse, but she didn't stir. Her breathing was faint and uneven, and every so often her chest would fall so still that Holt would glance down to make sure she was still alive. He never touched her more than necessary. His left hand held the reins. His right hovered near her back, steadying her when the horse stumbled or the terrain grew jagged. She was a slight thing, no more than 17, maybe younger. Her skin was flushed with fever, her hair matted with dried blood. The sign had left splinters in her dress and skin, and the ropes had carved angry welts around her wrists. The moon rose full and white. Holt found a small overhang nestled beside a rocky bluff, just wide enough to shield them from the wind. He slid from the saddle and lifted the girl down, laying her gently on a worn bedroll he always kept rolled behind his saddle. She moaned. Just once, a small, broken sound, then fell quiet again. Holt pulled a canteen from his gear and trickled water onto a clean cloth. He pressed it to her lips. She didn't drink. So he dabbed her forehead instead, then cleaned the blood from her temple, careful not to wake her. There was a calmness in how he moved. No panic, no talking, no prayers. Just the quiet duty of someone who knew what it meant to lose too many and save too few. He gathered dry brush, lit a small fire with practiced hands, and watched her by the flickering light. The fire cast shadows on the bluff wall, one tall and still, one curled and broken. Holt studied her face. There was strength under the bruises and defiance even in her unconscious stillness. Whoever had tried to kill her hadn't succeeded, but they had meant to erase her, to leave her as a warning, to make her a symbol. Holt had no use for symbols. He only knew what was right. From the saddlebag, he took a threadbare blanket and laid it over her. Then, taking off his coat, he folded it beneath her head. She stirred slightly, a whisper escaping her cracked lips. A name. He leaned in, catching only the sound, not the meaning. It wasn't English. She was dreaming. Holt sat beside the fire with his back to the stone. He didn't sleep. He rarely did. His eyes remained half open, watching the girl, the flames, the horse, the stars. He listened to the sounds of the desert, the wind through sagebrush, a distant owl, the crackling wood. He didn't think about the men who had done this. Not yet, but he would. And when he did, he wouldn't raise his voice or curse the sky. Holt had learned long ago that words were cheaper than bullets. And in towns like Bitter Creek, where he was headed by morning, justice wasn't handed out. It was taken quietly and without ceremony, just like he had taken her from the tree. The fire burned low as dawn crept near, and in that in-between silence, before the birds stirred, before the first rays lit the mesa, the girl opened her eyes. By the time the sun rose, Holt was already in the saddle, the girl secured in front of him, wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. She didn't speak, though her eyes remained open now, glazed, distant but watchful. She leaned into him as if by instinct, her body too weak to support itself. The ride into Bitter Creek was slow. It wasn't a large town, but it had ambitions. Whitewashed buildings lined the main street, and a brand-new church bell had been installed just 2 weeks prior. Holt remembered the flyers. The people here wanted to believe they were building something civilized, something permanent. But Holt had lived long enough to know polish on rotten wood didn't make it solid. As he rode through the center of town, conversations stopped. Chairs creaked as men stood. A shopkeeper dropped a broom. It was the girl they looked at first, the bruised face, the bare feet, the tangled hair. Then they looked at Holt, not with fear, but with recognition. Everyone knew who he was. He didn't cause trouble, but he didn't avoid it either. And when he walked into town, people usually whispered after he left. Today, they whispered before he even dismounted. He stopped in front of the doctor's office, a squat, red brick building with peeling shutters and a dusty wooden porch. Dr. Emerson was already at the door, frowning beneath his thick white mustache. "You bring in that girl here?" the old man asked, squinting. Holt didn't answer. He slid off the horse and lifted her down carefully. "She needs help," he said flatly. Emerson hesitated. His eyes darted toward the general store across the street, where a small cluster of townsfolk had gathered to watch. "She's one of them," the doctor muttered. "You know what'll happen if someone comes looking." "This ain't your fight, Holt." Holt's jaw tightened. "She's still breathing," he said. "Means it ain't over." Reluctantly, Emerson stepped aside. Inside, the room smelled of alcohol and old tobacco. Holt laid her on a cot near the window, while the doctor rummaged through a cabinet. "I'm not patching up a war, Holt," he grumbled. "She'll need rest, water, clean dressing. That's all I'll do." "She say anything yet?" Emerson asked as he cleaned a gash on her arm. Holt shook his head. "What's her name?" Another shake. "You know who did it?" Holt looked at him then. Not long, but long enough. The kind of look that made men stop asking. Emerson sighed. "If she don't die by nightfall, maybe she'll talk. Maybe not." He tied off the bandages and stood. "I don't want her here more than a day. Not with the folks in this town. You're welcome to sleep out back." Holt didn't respond. He just pulled a stool beside the cot and sat down. The girl didn't speak, but her eyes moved. She watched the ceiling, the shadows, the cracks in the wood above her. She didn't look at him, but her breathing slowed, as if she somehow knew she was safe. Outside, voices rose. Someone cursed. Another man laughed bitterly. Holt didn't need to listen. He knew the tone. A town deciding whether to mind its business or sharpen its knives. He stayed by her side as the sun climbed higher. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer comfort. He simply stayed. And for now, that was enough. It was well past noon when the girl stirred again. Her lips parted with a dry gasp, and her brow furrowed as if waking from a nightmare that hadn't ended. Holt stood the moment he saw her hand twitch. She didn't see him yet. Her eyes were fluttering, unfocused, struggling to adjust to light. She turned her head weakly, eyes half-lidded, and whispered something in her own tongue. Then, clearer, "Tamar." She said it again, louder this time, panic rising. "Tamar! Where?" Her arms flailed weakly and she tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her. She gasped in pain, falling back against the cot. Holt stepped forward and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. She froze. Her eyes met his for the first time. For a long second, she didn't speak. She studied him like one might study a stranger at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to run or fall. "You." Her voice cracked. "Where am I?" Holt didn't answer. He grabbed the tin cup from the side table and poured water. She stared at the gesture, hesitant, then took the cup with both hands. Her fingers trembled. She drank too fast and coughed, but kept drinking. "You cut me down," she said, more a statement than a question. He nodded once. She looked away. "I thought I was dead." Holt didn't speak. He pulled his coat from the chair and draped it gently over her shoulders. After a moment, she spoke again. "My name is Alawa." The name hung in the air. Holt's eyes softened. It wasn't recognition, more like quiet acknowledgement. He nodded again, as if storing the name somewhere in the silence of his soul. Alawa looked around the room. "This is a white man's town, isn't it?" He nodded. "Then I'm not safe." Another nod. Her voice grew stronger, bitterness coating each word. "They tried to kill me, said I was stealing, that I didn't belong near their wells. But the water wasn't even theirs. It runs through land that once belonged to my mother's people." Holt stayed still. "I had a brother," she continued, voice quivering. "Tamar. He told me never to walk alone. But he's gone now, shot 2 winters ago trying to protect a friend." She looked up at Holt again. "Why'd you help me?" He didn't answer. She frowned. "You ain't afraid of them?" His silence was its own answer. For the first time, she studied him not as a stranger, but as something else. Not savior, not threat. A man who didn't ask questions and didn't explain himself. The kind of man who carried too much weight in the eyes, and none in his voice. The door creaked. Dr. Emerson stepped in with a bowl of broth and froze when he saw her sitting up. "Well, you're tougher than you look," he muttered. He handed her the bowl and left without waiting for a reply. Alawa sniffed the food, but didn't eat. She looked back at Holt. "They're going to come, you know," she said quietly. "The ones who left me there. They'll come to finish it." Holt looked toward the window. Outside, the streets were quiet. But in that strained, watchful way towns get when they're waiting for trouble. He turned back to her, his face carved in stone. "I'm not running," she said, as if challenging him. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached down, picked up his revolver from the table, and slid it into its holster. Alawa nodded once, eyes full of fear, but no longer alone. That night, the wind rose sharp over Bitter Creek. Dust swirled down alleys and around porch posts. The town had that eerie hush it wore when something was about to break. Inside the back room of the doctor's office, Alawa lay curled beneath a blanket, her breathing more even now. Holt hadn't moved from the chair since sundown. She couldn't sleep, not really. The ache in her arms and ribs pulsed with every shift. But more than the pain, it was the image of the tree, the way the light had looked when the branch cracked, the rasp of the rope against her skin. She forced herself to breathe slow, to think of anything else. And then her fingers brushed something beneath the blanket. She reached down and pulled out a square of folded cloth. The fabric was worn, stiff with dried blood, but the design remained unmistakable. A red bear, stitched in thick thread, faded but deliberate. Alawa froze. She ran her thumb over the pattern. It was crude but symbolic, a tribal marker, though not hers, not pure Apache. This was the emblem of a renegade faction from years ago, a mixed group of white men and outcasts who had once terrorized the borderlands. Raiders, drunk on revenge, who didn't answer to tribe or law. Her brother had warned her of that symbol. "If you ever see the red bear," he had said, "you walk away. Fast. They don't want truth. They want blood." Her heart pounded now. How had this cloth ended up with her? She turned toward Holt, who sat staring into the dim light from the shuttered window. "You had this?" she asked, holding up the cloth. He didn't move, but his jaw flexed once. "You know what this is?" she pressed. He nodded, just barely. "Then you know they're still out there." He said nothing, but she could feel the tension in the room shift, like a quiet storm building behind stone walls. "My brother died because of men wearing this mark," she whispered. "He thought he could reason with them. He never came back." Holt finally stood. He walked to the window and looked out, eyes scanning the street like he could already see the danger coming. Alawa watched him closely. "You're not one of them," she said, more to herself than to him. "No," he said at last, a word like a stone dropping into a deep well. She waited. When he didn't continue, she looked back down at the cloth. "Why carry this, then?" He turned, and for a moment something flickered in his gaze. Not fear, not guilt, but memory. The kind that burned behind the ribs for years. "They were mine to stop," he said, voice low and rough. "I didn't." Alawa understood now. Not everything, but enough. He hadn't just found her by accident. He had been out there looking, not for her, maybe, but for them. And carrying this piece of fabric wasn't for revenge. It was a reminder, a failure, a vow. She looked at him with something close to softness. "If they come back—" "They will," Holt said. "Then we stand." He didn't argue. Outside, Bitter Creek slept with its shutters drawn. But in the dark beyond the hills, somewhere past the edge of torchlight and law, horses were moving. The red bear hadn't vanished. It was just waiting. The next morning, Bitter Creek wore its silence like a starched collar, tight, stiff, uncomfortable. No one met Holt's eyes when he stepped onto the main street. He didn't expect them to. Word had already spread. Folks didn't say it, but they all knew. The girl should have been left to die. Holt walked past them anyway. He didn't go far, just down the street to the livery. He needed supplies, oats for the horse, clean cloth, more ammunition. The shopkeeper handed everything over without comment, though his hands trembled when he gave Holt his change. Back at the doctor's office, Alawa sat upright for the first time, arms crossed over her chest. She'd slept little, but her eyes were clear now, wary but steady. "Someone was watching the window all night," she said as Holt entered. "Not the sheriff. Someone else." Holt said nothing, but he nodded. Dr. Emerson stepped in then, wiping his hands on a rag. "She can walk now, slowly. I suggest you both do that, out of town." "I'm not hiding," Alawa replied, before Holt could speak. The doctor scowled. "This town won't protect you. And he jabbed a thumb at Holt. "He doesn't talk, but trouble follows him like dust on boots." Alawa glanced at Holt. "Then I guess I'll follow the dust." Before the doctor could protest, a knock came at the back door. 3 soft raps, then silence. Holt reached for his revolver, but didn't draw. He opened the door slowly and stopped. There, standing with his hat in both hands, was an old Apache man, wrapped in a wool cloak. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp and yellowed like sun-bleached bone. Alawa gasped. "Grandfather Noko." The old man nodded solemnly. "Child," he said in a low voice, "you were not meant to hang. The spirits saw to that." Holt stepped aside, letting him in. Dr. Emerson frowned but backed away, muttering, "I'm too old for whatever this is." Noko sat beside Alawa and took her hand in both of his. "They left a message on you," he said, not unkindly. "But someone else left a stronger one when they cut you down." He turned toward Holt. "I know this man," the elder said. "You all think him just a gun, but long ago he rode into a war, not his own." Alawa listened, eyes wide. "There was a settlement near the San Miguel River," Noko continued. "Children were taken. Holt found them. He didn't kill the men. He burned their weapons, cut their horses loose, and carried the children home on foot. When the war came, it found no one to fight. He silenced it, not with a gun, with something rarer." Alawa looked at Holt, stunned. "You did that?" He didn't answer. "Why hide it?" she asked. He stared at the floor. "They didn't want to know." Noko chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "He speaks when it matters." The old man grew serious. "The ones who marked you haven't finished. They ride tonight. They want to start again what he ended once." Alawa stood shakily. "Then we finish it back." Noko nodded, but not with rage, with proof. Holt finally looked up. "Where?" The elder's eyes gleamed. "Where the red bear was first drawn, in the canyon's mouth." The sun dipped low behind the hills as Bitter Creek shuttered itself once more. Lamps flickered behind closed curtains. Fathers locked doors, mothers pulled children close. No one wanted to admit they'd heard the rumor, but they had. "They're coming for the Apache girl." No one said it out loud, but the name passed through whispers like wind through dry grass. Not because they cared about justice, but because they feared what might follow her. Alawa stood behind the doctor's office, dressed in a borrowed shirt and trousers that hung loose on her frame. Her hair was braided now, her arms bandaged. She leaned against the rail beside Holt, who hadn't moved since sundown. "They're not after me for water," she said. "It was never about that." Holt nodded once. "They think I carry something. A name, a place." He looked at her. "I was sent to speak with the council near the canyon. My people were promised land, promised recognition, but someone doesn't want that known." She reached into her pocket and unfolded a wrinkled piece of parchment, nearly torn down the middle. The ink was faded, but Holt could make out tribal markings and a boundary line. "This map," she whispered. "My brother died protecting it. I think they thought I'd burn it when they caught me. But it was sewn into my dress lining." Holt took the paper, studied it under the lantern light, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside of his coat. Just then they heard it. Distant hooves. Not one horse, several. Fast. Alawa's face went cold. "It's them!" Noko stepped from the shadows beside the barn, his old frame upright, unafraid. "They ride loud," he said. "Means they want fear to arrive before they do." Holt walked to the edge of the alley, peering around the corner. Dust rose from the far end of town. 4 riders, maybe 5, galloped in. Each wore a piece of red, a sash, a bandana, a streak painted across the chest. One of them held something long and crooked, a broken branch, the tree. "They brought the same rope," Alawa said, almost a whisper. The sheriff stepped out from his office with a rifle slung over his shoulder, but as the riders dismounted, he hesitated. One of them barked a name, and the sheriff backed up, disappearing into the dark. "They paid him," Noko said. "Or scared him worse than death." The leader of the riders walked to the center of the street. A red bear was painted across his chest in drying blood. "Bring her out," he shouted. "No more hiding, no more pretending." No one moved. Doors stayed shut. "She carries a name that does not belong to her," he growled. "She carries lies, she carries war." Holt stepped into the open. The man paused, surprised. "You again?" Holt said nothing. "You gonna hand her over?" Silence. The man smirked. "Or are you gonna die for another tribe's lies?" Still no answer. Then Holt opened his coat slowly and pulled the parchment from inside. He held it high for all to see. The riders shifted. One cursed. Another stepped forward. "You shouldn't have that," the leader hissed. Holt met his eyes. Calm. Cold. "I do." And that's when the guns came out. The moment the leader reached for his holster, time seemed to shrink. No words, no warnings, no rules. Just breath, dust, and the metallic weight of what was about to happen. Holt's hand moved first, not fast in a showy way, but with the lethal precision of a man who didn't believe in second shots. His revolver barked once, and the rider closest to the Red Bear leader dropped hard into the dirt, his rifle tumbling from limp fingers. The town didn't scream. It held its breath. 3 riders returned fire, shooting wild and wide, more out of panic than skill. Bullets ripped through the night, shattering a water barrel and sending splinters through the boards beside Holt, but he was already moving, 1 step sideways, down on 1 knee, sight steady. Crack. Second man fell. Crack. Third rider spun, hit in the leg, his scream echoing off empty storefronts. A 4th tried to retreat behind the sheriff's wagon, fumbling for cover. Holt stepped into the open now, calm and silent as the grave. He didn't flinch when a bullet grazed his coat, just raised his gun and ended it. Only the Red Bear leader remained, crouched behind his own horse, breath ragged, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood stained his side, graze not fatal, but his swagger was gone. He looked around and realized none of his men stood with him. "You think this ends it?" he spat. "You think killing a few cowards changes the land?" Holt said nothing. Behind him, Alawa stepped forward. Her voice rang out, firm despite the tremble beneath. "It's not the land you're afraid of, it's the truth." The leader's eyes flicked toward her. "You don't know what that map means." "I know it's real," she answered. "I know my brother died carrying it, and now the whole town's seen it." That made him flinch. From the shadows, Noko stepped into view, arms crossed. "The land remembers," he said quietly. "Even when men forget." Holt took 1 slow step toward the fallen man, not to finish him, just to stand above him. The silence roared louder than any bullet. The leader dropped his weapon. "I should have killed you both in the canyon," he muttered. "But I'll see you again." Holt's stare made that promise die before it left the air. Behind him, a door creaked open, then another. Bitter creak began to stir. Eyes peeked out. Faces appeared in windows. The unthinkable had happened. Someone had stood, had fired, had not backed down. And he hadn't done it for gold or for land, or even for pride. He'd done it for her, for a name worth protecting, for a wound the town could no longer pretend didn't exist. As the dust settled and the wounded groaned in the street, Holt holstered his gun. Alawa moved to stand beside him. For a long moment they faced the town together, and the town, for once, had nothing to say. Dawn broke slowly over Bitter Creek, as if unsure whether it was welcome. Smoke still lingered in the street, curling upward from shattered barrels and gunpowder-stained dirt. Buzzards circled in the far distance, drawn not by the dead, but by the memory of what had nearly been. The townspeople began to emerge, not in fear now, but in shame. They didn't speak to Holt as he walked past them, leading his horse by the reins. Alawa followed at his side, wrapped in a brown shawl someone had left on the doctor's porch. Her face was calm, eyes alert. If she felt fear, she carried it like she carried everything else, without complaint, without noise. At the livery, Holt loaded supplies onto his saddle with mechanical care: canteens, blankets, a pouch of dried beans, a small wrapped packet from the doctor. "Medicine for the road," Emerson had said without meeting Holt's eyes. Noko stood near the stable gate, arms folded across his chest. "The wind shifts now," he said softly. Holt didn't reply. "She carries more than the map," the elder continued. "She carries the memory, and you," he paused, "you carry the fire that comes after the silence." Alawa approached the old man. "Will you come with us?" He shook his head slowly. "My time is in the roots. Yours is still on the trail." Holt tightened the straps on the saddle and turned toward the girl. "We ride north," he said, "past the canyon." Alawa nodded. "The council waits near Iron Mesa. They'll want to hear what happened. See what we carry." The map had been refolded, wrapped in oilcloth and stitched into the lining of her new coat. She touched the spot now, just over her heart. The street behind them was watching. Quietly, awkwardly, a few women held children close. A blacksmith stood frozen beside his shop, soot on his hands. Even the sheriff had returned, standing pale on the steps of his office, saying nothing. No one tried to stop them. And yet, as Holt swung into the saddle, one voice broke the stillness. "You could have let her die," said a rancher near the general store. "Would have been easier." Holt looked down at him. His voice was calm, low. "Would have been wrong." He held out his hand. Alawa took it and climbed behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist as if she'd done it 100 times. As they turned to ride out, the horses' hooves thudded against the dirt like a slow drumbeat of departure. No fanfare, no cheers. Just the kind of silence that made men reconsider their own reflections. At the edge of town, Holt paused. He looked once over his shoulder. Bitter Creek had been a place of pain. But sometimes pain needed to be looked in the eye before it could be left behind. He turned forward again, and together they rode into the quiet. They rode for 2 days, mostly in silence. The land changed as they moved north. What had once been sun-bleached and cracked grew green and softer. Wind rolled through golden fields, brushing against cedar and cottonwood, and the sky stretched wider with every mile. They avoided main trails, stopping only to rest where water ran clear and no tracks crossed the dirt before theirs. Holt spoke little. Alawa didn't ask for stories. Still, something passed between them in the quiet. Respect not earned by words, but by the space they gave each other. In another life, she might have feared men like him. In this one, she owed him more than her life. She owed him the chance to speak without speaking. On the morning of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge and looked down into a wide, hidden valley. The air shifted. Below, tucked in the cradle of red cliffs and green grass, stood a small gathering of wooden homes and stone lodges. No fences, no weapons, only smoke drifting peacefully from cook fires. "The council?" Holt asked. Alawa nodded. "This is where they wait. This is where my people are still listened to." He dismounted, helped her down. "They won't welcome you with open arms," she warned gently. "You're still a white man." "I don't need arms," he replied. "Just truth." As they walked side by side toward the center of the settlement, faces turned to watch them. A few elders stood beneath a carved wooden archway. A boy ran to fetch someone important. Nobody smiled, but nobody raised a weapon either. An older woman approached, her braid streaked with white, eyes keen and heavy with knowing. Alawa stepped forward and held out the wrapped map, placing it in the woman's hands. "I carried this," she said, "through fire and rope, for him." She motioned to Holt. "But I live because of him." The woman looked Holt up and down, not with distrust, but with the kind of weight that measures a man without asking for his name. Finally, she nodded once. "Then both of you have earned the right to be remembered." They led Holt and Alawa to a stone circle surrounded by sacred markings. There, under the shade of a tall juniper, a scribe waited with ink and bark. "Tell us the names," the elder said, "of those who gave and those who took." Alawa began to speak. She told them about Tamar, her brother, about the tree, about the message carved not into wood, but into the hearts of people who'd never wanted to know the truth. She told them how one man, silent, forgotten, worn thin by regret, had stepped forward when no one else would. She spoke of the red bear and the fire it once carried, and how one bullet, rightly placed, could silence a war. When she finished, the scribe etched a new mark into the record of the valley, 2 names bound not by blood, but by choice: Alawa, Holt. Later that evening, as the fire crackled and the stars blinked awake, Holt sat at the edge of the settlement, sharpening his knife on a flat stone. Alawa joined him, folding her legs beside his. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. "Then maybe." She smiled. "Then we'll be ready." Holt glanced at her, then back at the flames. He didn't say it out loud, but for the first time in years, he felt it, not the end of something, but the beginning.
Sometimes, it only takes one silent man to change the fate of someone the world had already given up on. If this story moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that honor courage, dignity, and quiet redemption, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's more waiting for you.